All right, let's talk about the many faces of stairs and all the possible designs that they can come up with. This is a set that I saw this week, and they were unusual for me anyway, and that it had a split staircase. You come up on the main part here, then there's a little angled over part, a landing, and then you've got a part that goes up to the bonus room on this side, and actually this staircase is wider than the other side. So we'll show you that in just a second here, but you can see this goes up to a bonus room, and it's the only access to that bonus room. It comes down to the landing area, and then from that landing area it goes back up to the main area where the bedrooms are. But if you're coming up this staircase, you're going to see that we have a large open foyer. It kind of makes a horseshoe around this giant light fixture they've got in here. But you can kind of see walking around that you've got this open foyer, and basically that little part you're looking at, that's just a hallway that would count in the square footage. So other than stairs, if you can't walk on it, you can't count it. But here you can see coming up that staircase, the area that turns over just a little bit, and then we're going to walk up the staircase, and you can see just a little bit of the area that takes you towards the bedrooms, and then we're going to look out over the open living room. Now this open living room, from an exterior view like a county assessor would have, they would assume that might be floored living space. But you can see that's a lot of space that is open and is not included in the upper level square footage. Now this hallway you would measure from the outside of this little cap on the top there to the outside of the other area. Your widest part across that area is the width of that hallway. So, and you can see you've got this large open foyer, and of course there again, from outside you can't really tell that's open. But this staircase, now you can see the angle a little better here, but this particular staircase measures 87 square feet. Now if you don't include that in the square footage, that is a big difference with the price of square footage these days. Now the way I was originally taught, we did not count stairs as square footage on the second level. And there's a lot of people that still do not do that, and that's a problem, and that's why we all need to follow ANSI. You can see this split staircase, and you can see it on the plans here, where you've got the open foyer and the open living room, and you can see the staircase, and on the upper level you can really see how that staircase goes, and it's wider with the area to the bonus room than on the other side. Now let's talk about, look at this, 87 square feet. You can see the actual sketch of just the staircase. That's a lot of difference in square footage, guys. All right, this is the ANSI document, and you can see the staircase. Don't count the open area, count the treads on both levels. It's pretty simple. This is another sketch that shows you to count the measurements below that staircase. Basically, the stairs are finished square footage on both levels. All right, here's the written text from ANSI, and at the top it says, under stairs there is no specific height requirement. So remember that part, and I'll let you read the next part. But the stairs that go to an unfinished basement, that space is going to be counted in the finished square footage of the main level, regardless of what the stairs or the area around it look like. All right, let's look at some examples of just basic staircases that we run into every day. And these are good examples, just pretty typical staircases. At least in my market, these are pretty typical staircases. But on this next one, basically you're taking that staircase, you're lifting it up to the same level as the top floor and counting it in the finished square footage. Just like this one, you would lift it up, including the little area that juts out the whole staircase, and lift that space up. If they could all be like this one, it would make our lives a lot easier. A basic straight up staircase, we'd take them all day, lift it up and count it. This one's, not much more complicated. Just lift the staircase and count the space. This one, got a little bench in there. Some people might count it different ways. This staircase is wider than most things, but it's all a matter of counting that space on the upper level. Now, let's look at some spiral staircases and debate what to count. All right, I bet if 10 appraisers measured this, we're going to get 10 different measurements. And that's okay. This one has quite a few curves on there. Just like this one, sometimes it's just not possible to get it exact. But let's talk about spiral staircases and if it's finished living area on the upper level. If it's the only access to the upper level, it is not finished living area. Now this one's back to the other, and it's not quite so difficult this time, but on spiral staircases, you gotta compare apples to apples. If that is the only access to the upper level, how are you going to get furniture? What are you going to do? It limits the people that can live in the house, even on the exterior here. But it can't function the same as the rest of the finished living area. So, and what does ANSI say? It does not. No standard talks about it. And this one's even got a slide. But if it's a spiral staircase and it's the only access, it's not GLA. Now let's talk just a little bit about measuring upper levels here. There's so many possibilities, but when you have an open area, measure to the outside edge of the railing. You see the flat wall there, that's where your measurement ends. Just, don't make these more complicated than they need to be. Here you've got an open area between the stairs and the bonus room, if you'll have that. But, you've got to push those stairs up and count them and count the rest of the living area. Here, you got a little bit of angle. Just take your time and measure these areas. Now let's look at some and talk about GLA. This particular staircase is 21 inches wide and it leads to one room up in the attic. Is that GLA? This particular attic, somebody finished this off. You got an 18-inch staircase. Just like in this case, you've got an 18-inch staircase coming up into this area, and you can see the slope on the side there. How much of that is finished living area? Is half of that room, 7 feet high for over half of that space? This is a staircase that leads up to that bonus area. This comes right out of, there's a laundry room when you walk in the door, or a laundry area right off the kitchen, and an 18-inch staircase cannot be leading to GLA. Are these spaces usable? Certainly they have some functionality, but they should not be an apples to apples comparison with GLA. We're going to briefly look at some below grade examples, and the point of this is, they're not all just like this. We wish they were sometimes, but there are so many variations. When you say basement to one person, all across the country, everybody sees different things, whether it's a finished lower level on a lake or a cellar like this. There's just so many variations of the stairs. But remember, whatever these stairs look like, even like this, on that main level, you do not deduct that staircase from the finished living area on the main level. Whatever the stairs are, they are raised and included as finished square footage on the main level. But it depends on where you live as to what the definition of a basement is. Alright, just for fun, let's look at some interesting designs through here and some things that we run into. Not your typical staircase here. A lot of these things that we see, it depends on where you live, of course, but we run into some really interesting stairs and just configurations that sometimes you really got to step back and think, gosh, is that a typical or standard staircase? Should that really be included in the square footage? Does it have to have a handrail, whether it's glass or wood or whatever? Or can it be like this with no handrail up to an attic space? There's a lot of it depends when it comes to measuring stairs and square footage. But there's so many neat ideas with storage spaces underneath. There's huge open spaces like this in a log cabin. We've got assisted, to help people get up the steps. We've got elevators and stairs. Does the elevator GLA? Does this staircase count as GLA? It depends. Trying to measure stairs like this, do the best you can. It's not an exact science, but do the best you can. Then we've got things like ladder stairs, and does the space above that count as GLA? There's a bed up there. Is it a bedroom? It's nothing but a bed. There's no closet. It's really one of those things where you have to make judgment calls. In ANSI, it does not tell us whether to count ladder stairs. To me, there's no question that I would not count that in the finished living area. It's still, well, I should take that back. It is finished living area, but it's not an apples to apples comparison with GLA. It's almost like a detached living area. It should be listed and counted separately. The degree of functionality, if you will, is what you have to make the decision on. But you got no handrails. There's a little tiny space above it. And in this case, there's not much space at all above it. It depends. Sometimes you got to take a double take here or look again. Look underneath the staircase. Is that a functional problem? How about this next one where the guy is getting ready to hit his head? Is that a functional problem? Is that a typical or a standard staircase? Is the upper level finished square footage? And in my opinion, in these cases, it is not. How about a pole? Does that count as finished living upstairs? What if that's the only access? Then we've got detached spaces. People report this as GLA much too often, but if it's a detached space, we should know. Never include that. Here's another one. Upstairs, detached living area, great space, but it is not GLA. There's stairs going up to it. They don't count. Exterior stairs obviously do not count in the GLA, but you've got to take each case one at a time. They all start looking kind of like this. They're basically built the same, and you've just got to remember to look at them, count that space as square footage on 2 floors, and remember that you are trying to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges. It's still not an exact science, guys, and you've got to do the best you can. But there's 1, 2, 3 of square footage. Adhere and disclose ANSI. Be consistent and let another professional take your drawing, follow it, and come up with similar results.